Welcome everybody, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program today on managing transitions, the future of national oil companies in Latin America. It's a big topic and these are important times fraught with transition and uncertainties, as you know. We're very pleased that you're able to join us today for what promises to be a timely, deeply informed conversation. My name's Eric Farnsworth and I head the Washington office of the Council of the Americas, which is an organization founded almost 60 years ago by the Rockefeller family to promote democracy, open markets, and the rule of law across the hemisphere. So as you might imagine, we have energy issues in our DNA, and we have led an effort through the years to promote a deeper energy relationship between and among the United States and the countries of the Western Hemisphere. And it's my privilege to be able to open this important event today that we're co-hosting with the Center for Energy Studies at the Baker Institute at Rice University, our partner on several previous occasions in highlighting and addressing the most important energy issues across Latin America and the Caribbean. I want to make a special acknowledgement of Francisco Minaldi, who will be running today's panel discussion, who's not just a personal friend, but truly one of the world's most prominent experts on hemispheric and global energy issues. He's a star, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm delighted to be partnering with Francisco and his Baker Institute colleagues today. We just have to look at the papers this week to see the dramatic changes underway in the regional energy sector, leadership changes at Petrobras, questions about Pemex's ratings, elections across the region that have the potential to profoundly shift national strategies, to say nothing of the policy shifts that the new Biden administration has already begun to promote and pursue. And so we've assembled an A+ group of speakers to discuss these issues. We'll begin with keynote remarks from the CEO of Ecopetrol Group, Felipe Bayón. As all of you know, after just a few short years at the helm of Ecopetrol since 2017 and some 30 years in the industry overall, Felipe Bayón has led a corporate transformation process to meet an increasingly complex global environment, including two major industry threats, the sustained drop in prices and the COVID-19 pandemic. Through it all, Ecopetrol remains the largest company in Colombia and one of the leading integrated oil and gas companies in conglomerates in Latin America, even as it works to consolidate its position in the United States, Mexico, and Brazil. He's received numerous commendations and awards, as you would anticipate, not just for his business acumen, but also for his civic engagement and social concern. He'll be speaking with us today about Ecopetrol's strategic positioning for the industry and political and economic changes ahead. It's an absolute delight, Felipe, to welcome you here with us today during this extremely busy time. As you said, you just ran over from the Senate, and so we're happy you could fit us in. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of Ecopetrol, Felipe Bayón.
Eric and everybody, and thanks for having me. It's great to see many familiar faces and many friends in these opportunities. So if I may, I'll jump straight into the presentation, and I'll use something as a handrail and just to try to illustrate some of the points you were mentioning, Eric. And indeed, I think we're facing many challenges, and last year and these couple months this year have been trying and have been complicated. But I think the industry as such has an important role in terms of helping through its resources, know-how, technology, its footprint, helping in that transition going forward. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So who are we in Ecopetrol? The first thing is that we have a presence in the region. As you were mentioning, we're in Colombia mainly, so close to 90% of our operations are in Colombia, but we have a presence in Brazil in the pre-salt. We have a presence in Mexico in a couple of exploration leases. We've had for over 10 years a presence in the Gulf of Mexico in the US, and for the last 15 to 16 months, a presence in the Permian in Texas in the US. And we're actually doing, in partnership with Oxy, we're doing fracking operations, and I'll come back to that. So we have presence in 4 countries. We are the main transporter of crude and products in Colombia. Our products include not only crude oil, we sell close to 50% of our exports go to Asia and 50% to the Gulf of Mexico. But we also provide fuel, some 30,000 barrels of jet fuel per day, pre-COVID. We have 2 refineries, have a 400,000 barrel capacity. We're actually expanding our refinery in Cartagena. We're the largest self-generating company in Colombia in terms of power generation. We have a plant that produces biodiesel that it's then mixed with the diesel. And we also produce petchems, natural gas, and electric power for ourselves. And we have more than 14,000 direct employees overall in the group, and some 35,000 people that we employ indirectly. Let's go to the next one. So first thing, life is first. In Spanish, we would say primero la vida. And COVID has, I think, challenged us in many ways. It has demonstrated how fragile we are as human beings, but it has also, I think, allowed us to show a lot of humanity, humility, and kindness. And in that sense, Ecopetrol has never stopped. During the last almost a year, 12 months that we've been in lockdowns in Colombia, through the use of biosafety protocols, biometric check-ins, remote HSE and safety visits, we've actually helped government develop through digital some of the platforms they're using, and we found new ways of working. And in those 12 months, we've kept the country running, which is very important, by providing gas, the fuels, and the electricity that the country has required. Let's go to the next one. A strategy is unchanged. 3 key things. 1, strict capital discipline. Every peso, every dollar that we invest needs to be well invested and needs to provide the returns to shareholders. As a matter of fact, and a side comment, we're going to be announcing results for 2020 later today at close of business. Cash protection and cost efficiencies, reserves and production growth. And you see on the right how we're actually approaching this through increasing our recovery factors in existing fields, exploring in Colombia, onshore and offshore, doing businesses outside of our home country, and unconventionals both in the US and through a pilot project here in Colombia. And everything is underpinned by how competitive we are and how sustainable we are. Let's go to the next one. Tough year. Last year, you see, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but you see that we have revenues, EBITDA, and net income bouncing back nicely from the crisis of 2015-16. Note that we actually lost almost 4 trillion pesos in 2015. We've increased not only the revenues, also on EBITDA. So it's a demonstration of efficiency and what we've done over the last few years. 2020, complex year, a difficult year. As I said, we'll be announcing what we've achieved at the close of markets and close of business today. How we are, the response has been agile, a commitment to safety and biosecurity. We've actually had between 85 and 90% of all of our personnel working from home. And this was easy. You know, overnight we said we need to send everybody home because we had done a lot in terms of digital transformation. We established a contingency plan around financing and especially around getting more debt and being prepared. And we actually launched something, our culture declaration or principles last year. This was more than 10,000 people coming together and working to provide a framework around what we aspire to and what we believe in. And very important, social investment and economic reactivation. Next one, please. Energy transition has accelerated. You see, and again, as all forecasts, you may have a different view. Bottom line, oil and gas will be important. They will reduce in the next a couple of decades. And in Latin America, there's two things. There's important growth in terms of just the number of people that we would need to provide energy with. And you see the how much oil and gas will actually represent. You know, some people would say, oh, this just means that peak demand will reach you at a later stage? Probably. We don't know yet. Let's go to the next one. If we look at Colombia, a big increase in terms of renewables up to 2050. Oil and gas will continue to be very important, north of 50%. And to the right, I just want to show that Colombia has made a pledge or a commitment to reduce 51% of its CO2 equivalent emissions by 2030. This is a massive undertaking. It's something that the government has committed to do. The government has been, as a matter of fact, chosen to be one of the speakers at the UN Assembly in September, and will be participating also in COP26. So this is just a bigger challenge, not only for us, for the country in general, but I think from Ecopetrol, we'll have the opportunity to be part of this effort and help lead the way in which we look at how to get to that net zero by 2050. Next one. How do we adapt to those challenges? So if you look at, for example, the Energy Transition Index of Colombia, you see that Colombia is very well placed or has done very well. We need to ensure that we keep doing what we're doing. And it has to do a lot with the government push for renewables in Colombia. And as a matter of fact, we've already have had for over a year and a half a solar plant in operation, 21 megawatts, that has helped us reduce emissions and save a lot of money in terms of the operating or lifting costs. The drivers, I won't go through all of them. These are the things that we will need to be looking at. And then what are the key things that we need to do? One, look at our portfolio. You know, how do we become a gassy air company? And we want to get to from 17% of our production share that comes from gas to something that's much bigger. We need to promote a reduction in emissions. You know, Colombia emits end of 2019, 291 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Ecopetrol is broadly 11 million tons, so 4% of that. How do we actually ensure that we can reduce in line with what I was showing earlier, have a big reduction in emissions, and also implement circular economy? And then how do we diversify our portfolio? And I'll talk a bit more on that. Next one, please. Unconventional reservoirs, big opportunity. It's challenging, you know, and it's something that creates discussion and dialogue, and not everybody is ready to accept that we need to do fracking in Colombia. So I'll start with the left. We've been working at this. I'm doing something called Proyectos Piloto de Investigación Integral, which is the comprehensive research pilots for unconventionals. We will be drilling one well with a horizontal section. We will be fracking and getting information. And just so you know, we will be monitoring more than 200 environmental variables during that time. And we will be uploading the data. We will be using actually a blockchain to ensure that communities and interested parties have data online and firsthand. And at the end of the day, the country will need to make a decision, informed decision around the benefits or not of doing fracking in Colombia. To give you some context, reserves in Colombia, oil reserves are around 2 billion barrels. We think that only in the area where we operate in the Middle Magdalena, we could have 4 to 7 billion barrels of additional reserves. And this is a picture from an exercise 10 days ago in Puerto Wilches, Santander, where we actually presented Proyecto Calais, that's the name of the project, to the communities and NGOs and universities and unions and the likes. And on the right, this is to show or just give you a brief context of where we are in our business with this is called Rodeo, the joint venture that we have with Occidental. It has had a very good EBITDA margin in 3Q, 61%. EBITDA in 3Q, $14 million. Production 3Q of almost 8.5 thousand barrels and almost 5,000 barrels. And this is an operation that we started in November 2019. By the end of 2020, we had 22 wells in production, 22 more wells drilled that are now being completed in 1Q. So very quickly, in terms of these being short cycled, we could put the assets into production. In March, when WTI was at minus $38, we stopped operations. In June, we restarted operations. So this notion of flexibility and being able to reduce the time to market of hydrocarbons, fundamental in how we view the industry going forward. And it's one of the massive transformations we've done. And in that sense, experience from the Permian is something we will bring back to Colombia to ensure that we apply best practices as well. Let's go to the next one. So in terms of the increased role of gas, and I was talking about some of these metrics, 2030, we want to go to 35% in terms of production. We want to increase reserves. Last year, we replaced actually 105% of our gas reserves were replaced. In terms of social, by 2024, we want to grow from 4,500 to 18,000 new gas connections, tie-ins, for houses and users. And our social investment around gas will be close to 60 billion pesos. And in terms of the environment, we think, and you know this probably better than we do, but from an environmental point of view, the level of emissions per equivalent unit is much lower in terms of gas. Let's go to the next one. 4 pillars that we are seeing as, and Eric, you were mentioning the transition we've been undergoing in the company. We want to increase competitiveness. We want to avoid stranded assets. I remember some 5 or 10 years ago, when people talked about stranded assets, people sort of looked at you in disbelief and said, what are you talking about? What are stranded assets? Well, it's a conversation we're having today. It's real. We need to diversify our portfolios without losing focus in oil and gas. We need to accelerate decarbonization, and we need to drive things through the lens that we call TESG. Most people would refer, most companies would refer as ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. We've actually placed a T in front of everything because we believe technology is probably the key enabler, is something that basically sort of grabs everything else and allows us to be much quicker in how we implement some of the changes. And I think the last 12 months, living with COVID and having to deal with change, has proven that technology can be a big lever and a big opportunity. And to me, Eric and everyone, is a massive opportunity for industry, show that we are not ashamed of what we do, but we can actually do things differently, and we can be part of that conversation, more importantly, part of the solution. We need to do this through knowledge and innovation and human development. Some people call it retooling, human retooling. So TESG, the next one, please. And I won't go into everything in here, but how do we have positive social impact? How do we go beyond corporate responsibility? How do we innovate, accelerate, and how do we scale, make things scalable going forward? So I just wanted I use this so I can show, at least convey the belief, deep belief that we think technology is a fundamental part of how we need to do things going forward. And it can really leverage ESG. Let's go to the next one. So how are we doing in terms of ESG? Innovation and technology, we've pledged, or we've said we're going to be spending between 100 and 150 million bucks, working with some of the names you see there, artificial intelligence, entrepreneurship, you name it, and not only in Colombia, but outside. And we've actually made some good inroads. When I talk to my engineers in the refineries and we're looking at a specific plant, first conversation is about how much money are we making in each plant. So in their displays, instead of only having pressure, temperature, or throughput, they have dollars. And we know exactly what's going on in each plant. Massive change. And a big thing here is, how do you actually fight some of the antibodies in the organizations? Some people would have said, oh, we've done this like this for 20 years. Why do we need to change? And I know all of us that have been in industry have heard that before. From the environment, we're going to be planting 6 million trees. We're reusing 64% of the water that we produce. We produce much more water than oil. We're now monitoring 20% of our production facilities in terms of fugitive emissions. We're using drones and satellites. The intention is to grow this to 100% in the next couple of years. Emission reduction, close to 2 million tons per year in 2022. Some progress we've made in methane emissions, and we've committed to zero routine flaring by 2030. Social investment, there's 32 departments in Colombia. We're present in 23, and we're present in 350 municipalities of the 1,100 that we have. So 1.7 trillion in terms of social investment. Next one, please. In terms of renewables, I've mentioned that we want to go to 400 megawatts. This is how we would actually envisage our splitting the those 400 megawatts over the next couple of years. Next one. In terms of governance, won't go into all the detail, but a lot has changed, and I'll mention something. In 2006, 2007, some of the shares in Ecopetrol were floated, both in Bogota market or stock exchange and in New York. Today, we have close to 300,000 shareholders in addition to the government. The government still owns 88.5%. And in the context of the conversation today is, what do we need to do that's good for government, but that it's good for 300,000 shareholders here in the US. And we also have indirectly through their pension funds, 16 million Colombians that own a bit of Ecopetrol. And you see what we've done over the last few years. How do we strengthen our governance model? Boards of directors of Ecopetrol, there's only independent members right now, establishing fewer but more effective management committees at the senior level, clarity on who takes decisions, who's accountable, and how do we actually relate. And if you see, we've actually increased, we have some measurements. We're in part of the top 10 in Colombia in terms of how do we do things, you know. We were in 2018, we're number 9 this year. Still lots of things to do. Let's go to the next one. Corporate governance, we see the indices. During the last crisis in 15 and 16, we stopped reporting in some of this. And I'll just like to mention that we're going to be incorporating TCFD and SASB, which is a challenging topic. We will be including TCFD and SASB elements into our 20F that we need to report into the SEC later in the year. And you see all the standards that we're using. And we went back and reporting into the Dow Jones, and you see the results. Still lots of progress that we need to do, lots of work. Next one. A couple of weeks back, World Economic Forum announced that Ecopetrol is one of the 61 companies that will be reporting using the stakeholder capitalism metrics. I think we're 1 in 8 oil and gas early adopters. We're the only company in Colombia so far and the only company in Latin America. So again, this is just showing in terms of transparency and how proactive we want to be, where we're leading, where we're going, you know, in terms of ensuring that we can share information and people can make informed decisions. And the other thing is that we've been chosen to be part of the partnership against anti-corruption, or the partnership against all these anti-corruption initiatives, which is great. And we'll be having a seat at that table. Next one. Diversity and inclusion, what inspires us, and there's 5 things that we're looking at. This is gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, people that have been part of the armed conflict in Colombia. So veterans and only former guerrilla members, how do we work with them? And people that have disabilities. And you see, how do we measure ourselves, some of the trajectory that we've seen and some of the certifications that we've gotten. And I think in this one, it's important that the management team, the leadership of the company is committed to actually bring this forward. Next one. And I think I'm almost done to 25 minutes. So in terms of how do we see ourselves, and we presented almost a month ago a non-binding offer for a 51.4 controlling interest in ISA, Interconexión Eléctrica S.A. This is a company that's been operating for more than 50 years, operates in Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, is a leader regionally in terms of transmission of energy, is a leader in infrastructure, and we've made this non-binding offer. We're now in conversations with the Ministry of Finance to sign a potential deal, should we agree on prices and conditions, and incorporate into the Ecopetrol group a company like ISA that is very well run, that has a very clear strategy, that is a winning strategy. We want to maintain the company running as it is, arm's length from us. Lots of things that we can learn from ISA. And people say, why haven't other companies done this? You know, oil and gas companies. People are moving into gas to power, for example, or some people are having their, or shedding their exploration teams. And we're protecting the core, oil and gas, We have a commitment to Colombia to ensure that we can produce the energy and the fuels that Colombia needs, especially now as we look into recovery, and how difficult things have been. But we also have the responsibility of looking into the next 10, 15, 20 years, and what company can we create that's more resilient, that's sustainable, and that we can, in that sense, become part of the recovery, but also become Colombia's energy company. And with that, Eric, I have finished. Just wanted to provide some thoughts. I think we can take the presentation off, and ready to continue with this important discussion.
Well, thank you, Felipe. Congratulations first for your presentation, but also for your leadership of the company. You've made some dramatic changes already, and it's clear you have some big goals ahead of you. We only have about 2 more minutes before I turn it over to Francisco to do the panel, which will also have some very important conversation. But I have to ask you a question that's come up from a couple people. What sort of risks do you see to this strategy? You've laid out a very ambitious approach. But the world is a complicated place. Do you see any risks in 2 minutes or less that you can share with us?
Well, obviously there are risks, and I think COVID has shown that we are fragile as human beings and as corporations, and countries are fragile. But in that sense, I think, Eric, and I'll give you just one data point, but we have free cash flow to fund everything in terms of our organic investment, $4 billion at $45 Brent. So at 65 or 66, we have a bit more oxygen, and people say, oh, you're going to have a lot more money. What are you going to be doing with that? So we can deleverage the company. We're looking at some inorganic options. So we need to protect the core. Oil and gas is fundamental. And for Colombia, it's key that we keep the control of our destiny in terms of energy in our own hands. We are convinced that providing energy to people is probably one of the most powerful ways of closing the gaps that have been widened by COVID. So I think there will be risks in terms of strategy. There's expectations from people that we need to go faster. Transition is here. We need to jump into that effort. I think Ecopetrol has done that. It's leading in many ways if you look at the region. And actually, we're punching above our weight if you look at the global leaders. And more, we're getting people from outside Colombia saying, hey, can you share what you guys are doing? And there are some interesting things that we will be announcing in the coming months or so. But I think there will always be risks. But I think industry has a fundamental role to play in recovery, in transition, and also in well-being going forward.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was thinking exactly that point as you were making your presentation, how Colombia and Ecopetrol could be and are in some ways a model for others around the world, not just in LATAM, but around the world. It's a really interesting agenda you've laid out. And I know that Francisco is going to hate me for doing this because I want to extend by 1 more minute, Francisco, if I can. Please don't hate me, but I have to ask, you didn't speak a whole lot about offshore, and obviously that's an important part of both Ecopetrol, but also the global sector. And I wonder what if you could very briefly tell us what your plans might be in the offshore sector.
So 2 big things, Eric. One, we have some gas discoveries, both in Guajira, closer to Venezuela, and some in Golfo de Morrosquillo, which is closer to Panama. And we want to drill an appraisal well, big well. This is more than 2,000 meters of water to go and test the discoveries that we've done, appraise and test. We will be producing that. And we've partnered with Shell to do that. So it's great to have a world leader in gas, in everything in terms of finding it, developing it, and marketing it. And that I think will provide, Colombia has less than 4 TCF of gas today in reserves. This could be north of 8 or 10 TCF of gas, just to give you a sense. And we will be doing some work in Guajira as well, and some other work in the area. And there's a big play that we're looking at in partnership with Oxy for liquids. So we will keep you posted on that. But there's some other things that we're looking. So I am convinced the offshore could provide a very big sort of building block going forward.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back to talk about that more. Our time simply won't allow us to do that today. But ladies and gentlemen, I just want to offer on behalf of the Council of the Americas and the Baker Institute, our thanks, Felipe, for your presence, your presentation. Good luck with your announcement of results later today. I noticed you didn't preview those with us, and I didn't ask you, but that's okay. We'll catch you next time.
They're in the back. They're in the back.
And we look forward to continuing the conversation down the road. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Francisco Minaldi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you, Felipe, for a very interesting presentation. And you touched on a few of the topics that we're going to be discussing in this panel. It was really interesting to hear about your plans on natural gas and short cycle investment, the emphasis on technology and ESG issues. As Eric mentioned, Ecopetrol seems to be the company in the region that is moving more decidedly and strongly in the direction of tackling these challenges that we're going to be discussing in our panel today. So I'm Francisco Minaldi. I'm the director of the Latin American Energy Program here at the Baker Institute. I want to really thank the Council of the Americas and its Vice President, Eric Farnsworth, that you just met for co-organizing this event with us. It's a partnership that we value a lot to work with the Council of the Americas. And in particular, I wanted to take the opportunity to recommend that you read Eric's article that he just published, a really good article on Chavismo in Venezuela. You can find it in my tweet feed or in the Council of the Americas page. I really think it's a really good piece for those of you who are interested in what's happening in Venezuela. So we have a terrific panel today. We have a combination of expertise across different angles that I think is very valuable. We have Nimi Almeida, who is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Finance Group at Moody's, and she has been following for many, many years the national companies in Latin America, and so has a great view of sort of the financial health and their risk and opportunities in the future because she has to study their credit worthiness. We also have Lourdes Melgar, who is currently, we are honored and privileged to have her as our non-resident fellow. But as you probably know, she was one of the architects of the energy reform in Mexico, both as Deputy Secretary of Electricity on the CENER, and also later as the same role, but for hydrocarbons. And in the implementation of the hydrocarbon side of the energy reform, she was one of the key actors. And she, of course, when she was in that position, she was also a member of the board of Pemex. So she has a very good understanding of the challenges of that major national oil company. We also have the perspective of Guillermo Quintero. Guillermo was the regional president of BP in Latin America. In fact, Felipe worked with him a while ago. And he has also a broader experience outside of Latin America, because he was also involved in the presiding in the Middle East investments of BP, and he was sort of appointed as member of the board of Rosneft. As you know, BP is the largest shareholder after the Russian government on that national company. So that he even has that perspective. Not only has dealt with the NOCs in all over Latin America, all the ones that we are going to discuss, he has dealt with in some way or another, but he has also this experience with an NOC from outside our region. So that's a very valuable. And finally, we have my friend of many years, Luis Pacheco, who is currently also honor us by being one of our non-resident fellows. Until very recently, Luis was the head of the board of directors ad hoc of PDVSA, that the government of President Guaido, interim President Guaido, appointed to basically take care of the very difficult managing of the foreign assets of PDVSA. As you know, the Maduro controls, of course, the assets of PDVSA in Venezuela. And so in that very unusual circumstance, the leadership of Luis, I think, was very important in tackling a very tough situation. And before that, he had a long experience in the sector, including being the vice president, the director of planning of Petróleos de Venezuela in its previous incarnation before Chavismo, and also had a very interesting experience in the private sector as a similar position in Pacific Rubiales, later Pacific Energy, and had to basically also deal with Ecopetrol, and other national companies in the region. So with this, I just wanted to mention a few challenges that the region is facing. Of course, major economic depression, the worst recession since the Great Depression in the region. COVID deaths have been particularly high in Latin America and have affected the economy more than anywhere else. And of course, that combined with the already political unrest that we have in the region poses a very significant risk in the future for political upheaval, which can translate into, of course, the governance of these NOCs. In fact, we have a very recent example in Brazil with Petrobras CEO being ousted mainly because of an issue of raising the price of fuels in Brazil, in which basically the government forces Petrobras sometimes to subsidize the domestic market, and that of course generates a big tension with the autonomy of the company. And we have also the recent announcement of Pemex being the government reducing taxes and probably injecting some capital in Pemex again. And the company will announce their results, I think, today. And they have been losing money even when the situation wasn't as bad as last year with COVID. Of course, we have the prospect of potential peak demand. We have nevertheless the expectation of some analysts that we might have, because of the lack of investment and the increase in demand now, we might have a new high oil price cycle or mini cycle, or who knows, because we always get it wrong. And we have the new Biden administration with a focus, a very dramatic shift in focus from the Trump administration into decarbonization and climate policy. And of course, finally, a topic that Felipe Bayón touched upon, which is the concern about moving away from fossil fuels will generate a challenge for stranded assets in the region. So with that, I want to start with Nimia by asking her about the current situation of the national oil companies. I mean, we have PDVSA, of course, collapsed and in default. We have YPF at the brink of default. We have Pemex being again and again requiring the government to put money into it. And we have the situation that I just mentioned about the Petrobras, that was one of the companies that was doing a lot of interesting, had done restructuring and was continued to sell their assets. So, and of course, we have the Ecopetrol example that we just heard from. So can you please give us an overview of how, what's the current situation of the NOCs, the financial health, and what are the sort of which have fared better under circumstances and which are doing what is needed to tackle these challenges. Thank you very much, Nimi.
Sure, Francisco. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's indeed a very interesting panel. I think that we have to, as credit analysts, we have to try to separate the noise from the facts. This is very, very important. Credit ratings are supposed to last for at least 3 to 4 years. We should have a visibility for 3 to 4 years. So what we try to do here is to measure all these risks, of course, related to cash flow, but also with governance, that are very important to national oil companies across the board. Some of these companies, and I'm going to mention Ecopetrol, Pemex, and Petrobras because the ones that you're focusing on maybe today, they have very solid credit profiles despite their governments. I think that's very important to say. If maybe Ecopetrol and Petrobras itself, if they were in different countries, investment grade countries, with more liberty in terms of decision making, they would be pretty much investment grade companies, despite the volatility, despite the ESG concerns, etc. Petrobras and Ecopetrol in particular, they are doing at least some efforts towards ESG. I think we saw a Petrobras, for instance, recuperating strongly from Lava Jato, right? I mean, that experience was very traumatizing. Some of the protections for investors are right there in the bylaws or in the internal controls that they have in terms of different committees that support them, the management decisions. Some of the managers are personally liable, legally liable for the decisions that they make, so they need to follow the rules. Having said all that, any government in our region, in any government, Guillermo may talk about this and the other geographies, they can change this at any minute because they control these companies. So even if they have shares in the market, that's a risk that is always there. Can these companies be rated above their governments? Maybe not, exactly because of these risks. And we've seen very recently, we have seen many years ago, and it continues to be the same risk. We saw Ecopetrol buying ISA, right? I mean, that's something that it's a very good asset. It's a better risk than Ecopetrol. It adds to stability of cash flows, but there's no synergies right there, right? In terms of operating synergies. So, and this is pretty much, we saw this as a decision imposed by the government. Now they're changing the CEO of Petrobras. The controls are there. Will they remain there for the company, management and the board to take the right decisions that they're good for the business? And in the case of Pemex, I mean, this is something that is I think this is the worst case of all, because the company is living in a very adverse environment, business environment, and the government agenda is it's the opposite of where the world is going to in terms of ESG and business itself, and limited resources and a lot of that. So in a nutshell, we have contrasting styles, contrasting agendas, contrasting levels of interference, but all these governments in our region, at least, they tend to interfere if there is a political reason or a higher non-business goal that they need to fulfill. So that's the first words that I have for you today.
Thank you very much, Nimia. A very interesting overview of these different companies and their different challenges. I want to move on to Guillermo now. As I mentioned, you have this experience on the other side of dealing with these companies throughout the region. And I wanted to ask you, what are your perspectives on the challenges that these companies face within, of course, the challenges that every single oil company is facing, not only national companies, but of course with their peculiarities. So in this new reality of oil and gas markets, how are they going to be able to deal with the decarbonization strategies? How will they manage, for example, that some of their partners, like BP, the company that you work for, or Shell, are moving very aggressively in a different direction of decarbonization? And who is going to do the massive investments in the oil sector, if not these major IOCs and NOCs that seem to be still needed in any scenario? So go ahead, Guillermo, please.
Well, thanks, Francisco. Do you have an easier question for me? I just wanted to thank you for letting me participate and inviting me to participate in this interesting panel. I was very glad to hear Felipe's presentation. I think it's good to hear him again and good to hear his thoughts, because I do think that Colombia and Ecopetrol are, at the forefront of making a difference in the industry. Well, as you know, national oil companies control more than 60% of the oil and gas resources. And if you think about Saudi Arabia and Russia that hold, a lot of the share of production right now, they do have a lot of power. I would say that in different countries, what I have seen is that companies, obviously, NOCs are always driven by what their governments want them to do. But some companies take the lead, and some companies influence their governments to do the right thing. A good example is what Felipe just described to us. I'm not going to repeat what he said. Actually, I had some of those thoughts that I wanted to reinforce as well. But other parts of the world, in Russia, for example, I've seen that NOCs are expected to be an agent of change. And as such, they are incentivized to do that. So, in the form of tax breaks, they get tax breaks for being an agent of change. And driving the ESG agenda has been quite easy for that reason. I think NOCs, many NOCs are understanding that environmental, social, and corporate government responsibility are not only necessary for the good functioning of the companies. I was talking the other day with a friend who told me, many realize that it has teeth. ESG has teeth. And he said, it's like organic food. Several investors would like to invest in organic food because it's the right thing. They feel good about investing in organic food. So I do think that obviously there is a mix around the world of how NOCs are confronting or, taking this responsibility of the transition. The Middle East is another good example of commitment in this sense. When I was in Abu Dhabi, I visited the plans that they have for the Green City in Abu Dhabi, and they're taking those plans forward. So I do think there is a mix. A key thing for me, though, and I think this is important for the discussion, is what is the right pace of decarbonization? Can the world afford a fast pace? Does the world need a fast pace, or do we need to pace this with the right momentum? Because at the end of the day, the citizens will pay for the transition, so it will come out of their pockets. So the pace is important. I believe there are cleaner fuels, and Felipe mentioned gas. Gas is a clean fuel that can be used in the transition to cleaner energies. I believe that the United States is a good example of how they started increasing their gas production since 1947, when fracking started in the US. And they were able to replace coal in power generation. If you look at the numbers in the US, their emission levels have been reduced to 1988 levels because they have been intensifying the use of gas for power generation. So I think, so the world is moving. Europe is moving fast. Companies like GM are taking drastic decisions not to produce internal combustion engines. The European Union, I understand, is working on a Green Deal, on a draft Green Deal that will also promote border taxes to avoid companies migrating from Europe into countries that are less demanding, to say it one way. So I think it is moving fast, but I do think that policymakers need to be careful. They need to understand all the complexities. They need to understand there is a mix of technologies. They need to understand that they have different costs. And at the end of the day, the investors will decide, you know, what to invest in. I think some of the key challenges I see is that the investors are in energy are scared. They're not sure about the value story in the long term. They don't know how the revenues from oil and gas will be replaced. So this is a big thing, you know, because I think you asked me about challenges. I think funding is a challenge. The energy sector has been the worst performing in the S&P, and that means declining investment. That means loss of good talent migrating to other industries. And the investment funds are demanding a lot of compliance, particularly of IOCs. So they have to have the green credentials in order to invest, to get the funding. And to get those green credentials, they have to, you know, demonstrate that they're on the top quality of companies in the indices that Felipe has shown earlier. These indices are, you know, sometimes confusing. Sometimes they need more transparency, but they do need to show more transparency. They need to comply with those indices. So there is a role for NOCs, there is a role for IOCs. I do believe that IOCs, NOCs have the role of, you know, the natural resources that are needed in their countries. They need to produce the natural resources. They need to make sure that they provide self-sufficiency to the country. And they might not need to take the risk that IOCs have to take in investment in the energy transition. That will depend on the policies of each country, and that will depend on the beliefs that each of the NOCs has. I believe Ecopetrol, like I said, is at the forefront, but that's a fundamental thing. So probably NOCs have an edge over IOCs because they will not have the same problem IOCs have in getting the funds, in other words. So what do I think needs to be considered by NOCs in Latin America? I could probably summarize by saying follow the Ecopetrol example. And I know Felipe is a good friend, but he's done a great job. But I think it's about optimizing the resources. It's a matter of optimization of the resources. And that includes reducing the emissions in the form of methane emissions in the forms of CO2, and potentially carbon capture and storage. So those investments will probably be needed for the sustainability of the company. And on the other hand, NOCs could be an agent for change, like they expect that out in Russia, and work with their governments to decide how they want to transit in this energy transition. But more importantly, how do they make it sustainable into policies? Because as you know, the problem we have in Latin America is we change governments every 4 or 5 years, and then the following government is going to change what the previous one has done, and everything goes to the basket. But we're going through that something similar in the US as well. But I think that's important. It's important to make sure that those initiatives are made into policies. I have been following a group that I think it'd be important for NOCs to consider, which is the OGCI, Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. And there is 12 companies are in that, including some of the big ones like BP, Chevron, Exxon, ENI, but also Petrobras in our region, I believe, is the only one that have joined it. They're working on reducing the emissions from the oil and gas production. They're not working on transitioning to the clean energy possibilities. But how do you make the oil and gas production sustainable from an emission standpoint? I hope I didn't go too far beyond my 4 minutes, but
no, not at all. No, thank you, Guillermo. I think those are very interesting points that we will able to discuss now in some specific cases. So Lourdes, I want to move on to the case of Mexico. I mean, you have a different perspective that some of us, in the sense that you have been in the government, and of course, the national company, in a way, sort of a tool for, in the best of ways of the state to pursue a policy, in the worst of cases, a tool of of the short-term political wins. But Pemex seems to have obtained during the energy reform all the sort of the needed tools to tackle the many challenges that the company had, right? They were able now to partner with domestic and foreign companies to share the risk and obtain technology and know-how for the new sort of frontiers because of the reserves are in deep waters and in unconventionals and in natural gas. It also sort of changed the corporate governance of the company to make it more autonomous, and so it seemed, and also the way that the revenues from oil are managed in Mexico. But it turns out that the López Obrador administration seems to be reversing most of these, and of course more recently the on the electric side, the reform of the law shows a strong move in that direction. So how do you see Pemex tackling these issues moving forward, and what needs to be done?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this wonderful discussion with friends and colleagues. Let me begin by something that both Nimia and Guillermo said, which is that in Latin America, you can go in a direction and then you get a different government and things change. And, I think Nimia may mention something as almost change overnight. And that's what we are seeing in Mexico. The energy reform tried to provide Pemex with, as you mentioned, with all the needed tools to be able to have the flexibility to invest in harder to get fields. The geology is much harder, deep waters, and we're really talking of very deep waters in the Gulf of Mexico, to try to tackle the unconventional resources, and to be able to get not only the know-how, the technology, but also the financial resources. And what we have with the López Obrador administration is a U-turn, but I would say it's a U-turn to going back to maybe to the 1950s, because what is really at the center of energy policy in Mexico right now is a view where Pemex and particularly oil production and oil refining, have to be the center of not only of energy policy, but also the motor of the economy. And just to give you briefly a few numbers, last year, 2020, public spending, 56% of public spending went to the national oil company, to the national utility company, and to the Ministry of Energy, which is in charge of building the refinery. Yes, the Ministry of Energy is in charge of building the refinery. This year, 2021, 21% of the federal budget went to Pemex and CFE. So 21% in the midst of COVID is going to both Pemex and CFE. You mentioned the electricity reform, which is due to be voted by the lower chamber today, which basically eliminates the electricity market. And what it does is that it establishes a new procedure to deliver generation into the grid. What is really at stake here is that Pemex needs to get rid of all the fuel oil that it is producing, which has a high percentage of sulfur, between 4 and 6% sulfur, which, as you all know, has no markets these days. So basically what they're doing is forcing the national utility company to burn fuel oil in its electricity production. And basically they're putting at the very end of delivery, not only all the private producers, but more importantly, the renewable producers. So bye-bye clean energy in Mexico, bye-bye renewable energy. We're going back to basically fuel oil, coal, diesel, and some natural gas. So to get into the whole discussion, it's kind of interesting because Mexico is not a petrolized economy. Oil represents less than, oil industry represents less than 8% of GDP in Mexico. And also public finances are not petrolized. I mean, oil revenues represent less than 16% of the federal budget, but of the federal income, I mean. But President López Obrador believes that Pemex has to be not only the center of Mexican sovereignty as it was in the past, but more importantly, the motor of economic development. And what this means is that there have been a lot of efforts. First of all, all the bids, all the participation of foreign companies is basically banned. They stopped all the rounds that we were having to attract foreign investment into the E&P industry and also into the downstream and the midstream. So Pemex is due to do everything again on its own. And more importantly, there has been a whole fiscal policy geared towards saving Pemex, making Pemex strong again. And since the beginning of the administration, there have been tax cuts, efforts to relieve the tax burden. And we have gone from cutting profit sharing rights from 63% down to 58%. And just this month, it was announced to go down to 54%. In addition to that, there have been significant deductions in the range of almost $4 billion to Pemex, and significant capital injection. So there is everything. What I'm trying to say is all the efforts are put into investing in Pemex and making sure that Pemex on its own can increase its oil production. By the way, there is no effort to produce natural gas. Actually, gas delivery to the system is declining. But what is interesting also is that the López Obrador administration decided that what Pemex is good at is shallow waters and onshore. So fracking is banned in Mexico, no fracking, so no access to all the shale resources, no deep water, and Pemex is supposed to do everything on its own. We got out of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, no efforts to tackle any of the climate change issues. Actually, our commitment to zero gas flaring are basically off the wall, because just last year we increased by 69% the flaring from Pemex. So to be brief, I think a lot of goodwill is being put on the side of the government, a lot of financial fiscal approaches to save Pemex, but unfortunately, I think that we are missing the strategy is not the right one. A lot of the efforts to improve the governance of Pemex are also being dismantled, as basically the company does what the company does what the president mandates. So I would leave it at that as opening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lourdes. So Pemex seems to be sort of a prime example of a company that seems to be basically looking at in the opposite direction of all the challenge, all the sort of the movements that are happening in the oil industry in the world. Luis, you have not only worked in oil companies, but you have for many years looked at oil policy and what should governments do, and you have been an observer of that, in particular, of course, in two countries, a prime observer in Venezuela and Colombia. So I wonder, what do you think about these challenges? I mean, are these NOCs sort of dinosaurs from the era of rent maximization in the 1970s? How are they going to be able to deal with these challenges? And in particular, if you think about the case of Venezuela, that basically has a destroyed NOC and will have to recreate it, does it make any sense at this point to recreate an NOC in Venezuela, given the massive challenges that even the ones that are working and that are tackling them are facing? Your mic, Luis.
Yes, I'm sorry, Francisco. Thank you for the invitation and for sharing in this panel. A lot of good friends. First of all, I'd like to say that I was very impressed with Felipe's presentation. If one looks at that presentation, I think one should say, I rest my case that the NOCs are the best thing that will happen since Coca-Cola, which I don't believe. But looking at Felipe's presentation, I think Ecopetrol is at least is doing well. And that takes me maybe to my first point. And I think it makes a lot of difference with Ecopetrol. And let me just use as an example that Felipe comes from an IOC. It's not, and that most of his management team is also from IOC. So you can say that at this particular point in time, you have an NOC that has an IOC mentality. So he's been able to mix that, and that I will use as a background to what I need to say. The second thing is as you all know, and if not, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, Djamani just died in London. And Djamani had this reputation from being, a very successful, minister of oil for Saudi Arabia. And I was aghast to when reading his obituary in Reuters that his career was a succession of mistakes and errors, which I found very surprising because it didn't fit the image that I had of the guy. And then made me realize that people were judging not Djamani, but the size of the resource base that he was managing, namely Saudi Arabia. And that then takes me to think that, of course, it's difficult to generalize about NOCs. I mean, because not all NOCs are equal. And it depends on the culture of the country, and it depends on the resource base of the country. And let me just compare Colombia with Venezuela so that I can go down to the Venezuelan example. even though Venezuela's discovery of oil and Colombia's discovery of oil were about the same time in the beginning of the 20th century, they had completely different developments as oil countries, and therefore their NOCs, even though the NOC in Colombia is a lot older than PDVSA. Ecopetrol was founded in 1951, if my memory serves me right, whereas PDVSA was founded in 1975. You see that the two NOCs moving completely different directions because of the way the country looks at their resource. There is a lot more resource nationalism in Venezuela, more akin to the Mexican example than the Colombian example or the Brazilian example for that matter. So that's also some differential there. And therefore, when one looks at the future, which is your right question, is the political culture or the social way that each country looks at the resource, does that help or hindrance this transition, which is what we're trying to look at. So I believe in Colombia because the resource base is smaller. Maybe Ecopetrol is right in being at the forefront of the transition, and it's easier for a company like Ecopetrol to do that. Whereas if you look at Venezuela, where, to tell you the truth, there is no NOC at this point in time, completely bankrupt morally and financially and technically, it will be more difficult. Should Venezuela have an NOC? Well, I have heard you said that in Venezuela you need it because it will function as a political fuse. If you don't have it, somebody will come home and nationalize whatever opening you do, like in Mexico. So that I tend to agree with you. But on the other hand, can a bankrupt society like Venezuela get an NOC that is of any influence in this transition? I have my doubts. I have my doubts because the country doesn't have the funds to fund that. And even if the country can raise funds, should they direct it to that sector, or should it be directed to other sectors that are more needed? I am of the opinion that if it was up to me, I wouldn't have an NOC because they tend to be in the long run inefficient. In the long run, some people have, if you look at it, it will have valleys and peaks, but in the end, the trend is towards inefficiency, especially if they have some sort of monopoly. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't believe that a country like Venezuela should have an NOC only because it will waste resources. But I also think that, like you do, that maybe it's a political necessity to have one in order for the country to be able to address the resource development. Over.
Thank you very much, Luis. And as you can see from Luis' words, we have been discussing this issue among us for a long time. One point that I wanted to discuss with everybody is the following. Very recently, the Natural Resource Governance Institute, in which Lourdes is a board member, and my good friend Patrick Heller, I see him in our audience today. They published this study that looks at what will happen with NOCs if as expected, there is a peak oil demand and there is a sort of a decarbonization transition out of fossil fuels, and the price of oil is in a lower range of, say, $40 to $50. And they found that, as Luis said, it depends a lot on the endowment of different countries. And of course, you have very low cost NOCs in the Middle East that don't seem to be challenged by this environment in terms of their financial viability or stranded assets. But we see that some of the Latin American NOCs are in a much more tougher situation because they have higher break-evens, and in particular, in Ecopetrol itself is there among one of the companies that will have some potential stranded assets. And of course, PDVSA, although I think that the figures of break-even there have to do with the sort of the projects that were designed in the past with very high break-evens, and the reality might be different, and that might apply to other companies as well, that they can reduce those break-evens. But in general, the question is, how should we think about this issue, right? Because governments, their opportunity cost of using those funds in something that could be a very risky venture because of the issue of stranded assets is, of course, health, education, other priorities. So should we think that some of these projects should be that in the past were done by NOCs should be outsourced to IOCs if they want to take the risk? Of course, it's different. It's not state-owned resources. Also, some of these projects, of course, like the deep waters in Mexico, require know-how and technology that maybe the NOC doesn't have. Should we think about NOCs in this new world? Of course, this is more like a risk assessment because we don't know when this is going to happen. But for example, should NOCs be in the business of doing exploration at this point? Or should this be outsourced to IOCs? What happens if we, on the other hand, if we cannot get IOCs to invest because of the pressures that Guillermo was mentioning from investors that say, hey, you shouldn't go in there? For example, the Orinoco Belt in Venezuela, or eventually maybe Chicontepec in Mexico, who is going to develop some of the resources if IOCs are not going to be developing them? And someone asked a question on the new producers in the region, Guyana and Suriname. Suriname created an NOC. I think it's a bad idea for a new producer like that. Guyana, I think, very wisely decided not to create an NOC. But what are the sort of the advantages or disadvantages of not having an NOC in terms of the potential good side of NOCs, maximizing rents or being a tool for development of capacities in the country? I don't know which we should start with. Maybe with Nimia. Maybe we should go back to our order. What are your thoughts, Nimia, on this?
The answers, I think the answers are in your question already. The right balance between using the resources that each country has and having an agenda for energy, because this is about energy security. So you do have to have a very clear agenda for your energy security. And then the aspect of corruption as well. So, in our countries, in Latin America, as long as we have corruption, this agenda in particular is going to be so flawed that it's going to be very difficult for any company, to have a sound business, long-term business, especially for national oil companies. So you have the example, for instance, in the United States, they have, no national oil company, but the energy system seems to, the industry seems to work very well. They are the number one producers of oil and gas in the world today, exporting. Think that it would be, we didn't think about that 20 years ago. So, and all these countries in Latin America, just watching the United States having all this success, and they were the number one countries in the world just a few decades ago. Yeah, I can't believe that Brazil is the number one oil producer in Latin America after, Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico. And again, I think this is a matter of corporate governance in the government level, having a clear energy agenda and getting corruption out of the way. And if you have that, doesn't matter who is who is the president, right? Doesn't matter who is the political agenda. So institutions that are very strong And we are losing that, especially in Mexico. And those are going to be the NOCs that are going to see into the future, like Ecopetrol and perhaps still Petrobras, that will see these opportunities, these resources opportunities, these income opportunities for the country, and then spend the money elsewhere, like education and health and everything. So as long as we don't have that, this is going to be wishful thinking.
Thank you, Guillermo. Your thoughts on how they should deal with this?
Yeah, I agree with Nimia, but also I wanted to go back to what Luis was saying, because in some countries, NOCs could work. It seems like in the case of Colombia, they are well aligned with the government, and that creates a very good synergy. Like I said before, they could have an edge over IOCs, which have an issue getting funding because of all the green credentials that they are demanded to comply with. Obviously, the United States, they have institutions that have worked for centuries. So I think, I believe that in some countries, particularly in the case of my home country, Venezuela, I agree with Luis. I think we need to think about, having a good regulator in place and, opening up the sector to private investments. It will be more challenging now for private investors to go back because of the energy transition plus the history that has been accumulated there. But I think it's the right thing to do. If I were, managing an NOC, I would be very careful about, ultra deep waters, extra heavy oil. You need to put a real good screen on the economics of longer term investments and be careful about the payout times. Like this report says, are they gonna be underwater, these investments? Some of these investments are they going to be stranded underwater? Well, it depends. It depends on how they are managed. But it also depends, like I said before, on the pace of the energy transition. Again, I think pace of the energy transition is a key consideration for the world and for the industry. And that needs to be matched, of course, with the expectation of scientists in terms of global warming and, not reaching the plus 2 or 3 degree level of warming in the world that could create all sorts of other problems. So it's not an easy equation, but I think at the end of the day, the markets will decide what's the best thing to do. And some governments, of course, will decide what is the best thing to do.
Thank you, Guillermo. I want to, before moving into Lourdes and Luis, sort of add another layer, which is we have heard from Nimia and Guillermo and from your previous interventions that it's very important the differences between corporate governance and the institutions in the country. So I wonder, what do you think about some of the ways in which the region has tackled the concerns about how to manage the oil sector? Have been two in particular. One, opening to private shareholders part of the equity of the company, and we heard Felipe Bayón mention that Ecopetrol has 300,000 shareholders. Petrobras even more. It's more than half its equity is in the hands of private shareholders, and YPF a significant share, in contrast to PDVSA or Pemex or Petro Amazonas or Petro Ecuador or others. So how important is that? And does because Nimia mentioned about the importance of the corporate governance, but we're seeing that in Brazil with Rousseff and now again with Bolsonaro, it seems that all the checks and balances are not necessarily fully working, even though it is listed. And then the second sort of issue is, how about the model that both that Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico implemented of trying to create that strong independent regulatory body to be sort of the center of policy or of implementation of policy, and try to move the NOC to become a more competitive player, more sort of a player in a competitive market. Are these two strategies effective in the in the context of Latin America, and what should we how should we think about them? Lourdes, can you please comment on that? And I have you, Guillermo, so yeah, Lourdes, go ahead.
Sorry. Sure. I was actually going to answer your question, taking into account the way we did things in Mexico during the energy reform, because you mentioned risks, and I think if we want to diversify risk, we need to have different players. NOCs can do certain things, and then you can have those who want to run the risk. And one of the key things that I think worked well in the Mexican case was that we separated very clearly what was the role of the NOC. So in the case of Mexico, we tried to make it into this empresa productiva del Estado. So it had to be able to do things in a profitable manner and also be accountable for that. We had the ministry do just policy, and actually the ministry is the one that drafts the oil contracts. And finally, we had the regulator, which actually is the regulator, but also is in charge of conducting the bids. So the regulator doesn't draft the contracts, that's the ministry does it. And one of the things that was very important about the Mexican bids was that they were completely done in the open. I mean, anybody from anywhere could access the contracts, they could follow the bids, and we didn't lease an area. This is very important. The companies don't have an area. What they have is a contract, because of all this resource nationalism, they have a contract. They're working for the Mexican state, and they have to produce, and they're being heavily there's heavy oversight by the regulatory body, not just the CNH, but also the one that has to do with environmental issues, social issues, etc. And then the other important part in terms of handling risks is the fact that we created the Mexican Petroleum Fund, which basically gets all the revenue from this oil and gas activity, E&P activity, and there is a very specific way as how these returns are used by the state. Of course, all of this, as Nimia mentioned, is being dismantled by the current administration. But I think there is an important part in that to make sure that there is transparency as to where the income comes, how it is used, when it is used, and especially thinking about the future. And also in terms of having very clear divided activities so that there is no politics that gets involved, there is less risk of interest, whether it's a company interest or whatever, but there is transparency and openness. All of that, I think we are losing it in Mexico, in part because corporate governance has been so hard in terms of the NOC. We had all these scandals about Pemex in the past, and now instead of strengthening the governance, we're seeing that it is weakening with more political control.
Thank you, Guillermo. You wanted to.
Yeah, just briefly, just wanted to say that it depends on which country you're in. In the case of Brazil, where I lived for 6 years, I mean, I loved the way it worked. We had the ANP, a good regulator. We, as companies, as private investors, competed with everyone. And, it was very transparent. And we also had a very strong IBP, which is Instituto Brasileiro do Petróleo, which also, had a strong voice with the government and with the regulators to make sure that, the right decisions are made to incentivize the investments in these companies. So I guess it depends on the country. Like I said, Brazil is diversified. When we went to the bid rounds, obviously, many people liked to partner with Petrobras because of the knowledge they had on the basins, but not necessarily, if you didn't want to, you didn't have to. The other thing I see good in the case of Brazil is shortly the gas monopoly in Petrobras will end. And that means that, you know, new investments, private investments can go into gas, you know, especially transportation and marketing, which was a monopoly for Petrobras in the past, and which hindered some of the investment decisions in the past.
Great. Luis, what your thoughts on these issues? You have dealt with the model. I mean, it's different, slightly different from the one in Brazil, but you know, the Colombian version of the model as on the private side, and your thoughts about how this should be implemented elsewhere.
Well, I think the short answer to all this is that all models tend to break down in the long term. Maybe some like the Mexican one broke down before its time. I mean, it didn't even start crawling, let alone walking, before the new government killed it. I think we tend to look at these things, and this is my experience the last 3 or 4 years talking about this with you and with a lot of people, that we tend to look for magic solutions, like a silver bullet. If we have an agency, we will solve all the problems. Look at how Brazil has done it. Look at how Colombia has done it. I think the experience in Colombia is that the agency was successful at the beginning because it was lucky enough to have the boom of the commodity price, and Venezuela was going down, so a lot of people came here, and Ecopetrol was able to also get some leverage going on. But if you look at the model in itself, most of the production and the reserves are not under the umbrella of the agency, are still under the umbrella of Ecopetrol. So you have in Colombia a mixed model where Ecopetrol never left having the controlling position in the industry, and it still has control of the transport infrastructure and the export infrastructure. So Colombia is a case of its own, different from Brazil, and different from it works, I mean, of sorts, but then again, the type of companies that are attracted are completely different than the ones that are attracted to, let's say, Brazil or Mexico or Venezuela should attract. So I think that the main word here is adaptation. I think you need to think that your model has to adapt to changing conditions, and the changing conditions have to do with prices, have to do with size of resources that are on the block, and also the fact of competition. I mean, as the market changes, especially in the transition, you will find a lot more competition between countries to attract these IOCs that Guillermo thinks that are not attracted to come by. But I wanted to go back to the transition, if I may, Francisco.
Sure.
Because is there a role for the oil company NOCs in the transition? And the way I understood the question was, should countries use their NOC to be their energy companies, which is apparently the way that some companies are going. And then you should ask their two questions. The first one we already dealt with is should an NOC, which is supposed to be efficient at oil, be burdened by other businesses which don't have the same margin or require different core competence than the oil? I mean, is that something we do? I mean, we look again at the experience of Venezuela, where there was this mythology that oil industry, central bank, and the military were the only efficient organizations of the state. Therefore, let's use them for something else. And we burden PDVSA with food imports and housing and all that, and you put the military in charge of everything, and you see the result. So is that something that we should do with the NOC? I mean, burden them with different kinds of business? Is energy an enough generalized umbrella to do that? I have my doubts about that. Not because they're going to be inefficient in doing that, but because will they end up subsidizing those other ones? Will the state then use cross subsidies now because oil and gas gives you a lower margin, less use that to do that? Or as we understood from Felipe, we're going to leave that business on its own. I'm just buying it and then just going to leave it function as it was, in which case, what is the point of buying it? If you're going to leave it alone and leave it as it is. I mean, why are you doing that? So those questions, I think, still need answers, which are not very clear. And of course, it will depend on which country you're talking about.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we have to wrap up, and I think your comment is perfect for what for the last comment that I want from each of you. So I think it obviously depends on each country in terms of the endowment, the governability, the institutions, etc. But sort of putting your crystal ball, given these sort of challenges and trends in the world, what are we going to see, say, 10 to 20 years from now in NOCs? We see this model of moving into energy companies that are also electricity and heavily involved in natural gas, or are we're going to see downsize of NOCs because they shouldn't move into other businesses, or are we going to see privatized NOCs? Or are we going to see this sort of the dying model of a company that used to be profitable, like Pemex, when they had very big rents, very large rents, but now they're going to be struggling until their eventual sort of collapse. So a very brief comment from anyone who wants to say, and sort of a closing remarks. Let's start with Nimia and then move on to Guillermo.
And very interesting question. I love it. I think that all these companies, they have a 5-year plan. They don't have much longer than that. I think that, again, depending on the country, Pemex, I think, is going to be rescued by the government eventually in 10 years. It's going to be a company that is not going to be very successful in delivering the results that they need under the current circumstances. I see Petrobras downsizing as well, focusing on E&P, but it's still, with these long-term prices not being, the growth is not going to be very hard and very strong. Maybe Ecopetrol will grow, and they have a focus on diversifying a little bit more clear. I mean, the diversification plan a little bit clear. They can grow in other industries. But from what we have right now in terms of their business plans and the politics in all of these countries, I would say that Petrobras could grow. Ecopetrol could grow. Petrobras is going to pretty much stay the same, maybe reduce, and Pemex is going to be eventually absorbed. Today, I don't think Pemex will be a target for a privatization. I think the conditions are not there at all for privatization, so it's going to be a government burden. And the others two, I think they could have some interest, but I would think that Ecopetrol has a better offer to investors, I think, in a 10-year period, as you mentioned.
Great, Nimia. Thank you. Guillermo.
Okay, but don't put your money on my crystal ball. So I think Petrobras has already started the downsizing in a sense. They're selling assets. They're focusing on the pre-salt. They're selling their refineries. I think they will continue to do that. And in terms of being the energy company, in Brazil, there is competition for doing that. So I don't think they will become the energy company. I don't know what will happen in Venezuela. Honestly, I couldn't tell you. It's very difficult to predict. And I think in terms of Mexico, I'm not an expert on that, but from I've seen from a historical perspective and hearing the comments here, I don't think that the governments are ever going to let Pemex die as a company. It's my view. I don't know.
Great, thank you. Lourdes. Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, I said in the case of Mexico, I might be wrong, but you know.
Yeah, go ahead, Lourdes. Thank you, Guillermo.
First, Pemex will never be privatized. I think that's very important. Even with the energy reform, nothing was privatized from Pemex. There was an opportunity for private or international participation, but no privatization. I think Pemex will be left with a lot of stranded assets because we have talked a lot about the energy transition, but we haven't talked about the fourth industrial revolution, the electrification of things and how that is changing things. You know, the outcome of the electric car 10 years from now, it's going to be a very different world. I think it's going to be the financial burden of its debt on the Mexican government is going to be huge, and we're going to be paying it for many, many years. And I see a saving, you know, something good could happen if Pemex decides to get to produce the natural gas. Mexico has a lot of natural gas reserves. We need them for the energy transition. They've been ignoring them. So hopefully they would decide to take a look at that.
Great, thank you. Luis, you have a final remark?
I have a final say. Thank you. Well, very, very quickly. It really depends on the path that you see forward. I mean, if one believes on this scenario where, you know, everybody's green and then we all go into this Jetsons type of society that everybody is very modernized and very virtual, we're never going to go back to the office. But thank God I don't have an office to go back to, but that's a different story. Then the oil industry will become a low margin business. And why will governments want to be in a low margin business? And maybe all this resource nationalism will just be an anachronism. Because in the end, it's not all about the country, it's about who gets the money. So follow the money. If there is no money in oil and gas, NOCs will just dwindle down, whichever path you Nina just mentioned, was some quicker than the others. Maybe some NOCs, and maybe Ecopetrol is one of them, is they keep lucky with their management, having people like Felipe, will go the path of Equinor. Well, they have their oil and gas, but they have this path towards this green transition. If on the other hand, there is a black swan, and then all of a sudden we have again $100 barrel for some time, then you will see the whole thing. We will have another panel, and then we will say, what are we going to do with this? And why is the Venezuela now thriving with $100 barrel, even though they are producing only 500,000 barrels? So it is very difficult. So again, the word here is adaptation. I think the NOCs and the oil industry in general, and I think that's what you're seeing behind all the, you know, the politically correct speeches. What you're seeing is companies looking at adaptive strategies, which is what one needs to have. I remember when this I finished, when I did or coordinated, I should say, the last strategic plan for PDVSA in 2001, we even changed the slogan. The slogan of PDVSA was, "We are the energy." We wanted to become 20 years ago an energy company. And the people who opposed more that type of strategy were the same oil people. Oil and gas people didn't want to go into that. So you need strong leadership, like maybe what Felipe is showing, to be able to walk while you chew, so to speak. So oil and gas transition, and trying not to, you know, get confused in your mind as to what exactly is it that you're doing.
Thank you very much, Luis. This is a great final reflection, and I promise that I will invite you for those when those scenarios materialize of higher oil prices or who knows, and we can discuss again how this might happen. So this has been a fascinating panel and very interesting event with Felipe's remarks. And so we thank all of you for participating, and the Council of the Americas for being our co-organizers. And so we will see you in another event. I don't know, Eric, if you want to say anything to close. But
no, simply terrific panel, well moderated. Congratulations. I learned a lot. Well done.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hasta luego, gracias.